Good evening. My name is Ginger Brown. I'm the Vice Chair of the Community Facilities Study, and I'm also the Chair of the Economic Modeling Subcommittee. And I'm very happy to be here with you tonight to lead the discussion. First, I wanted to say thank you to staff and to all of our presenters for giving such good presentations. It was a tremendous amount of work in a very short amount of time. And I also wanted to acknowledge County Board Member John Bystad, who has joined us. So welcome. And I wanted to remind everyone that our discussion tonight is largely going to be the study group, but everyone should have a participant survey. And so if you have questions or thoughts, we welcome you to write those down and turn them in because they will get to the right place. The study group is here tonight to pull themes out and challenges, and all of that information is going to be sent back to our subcommittee so that we can chew on it more. And that's going to be on March 23rd, so if you find this incredibly interesting and you're ready to continue to talk about it more, you're more than welcome to come and watch and participate. So I have a couple of other things I wanted to remind folks of. First, we are hiring a consultant. So tonight, as you can see, there was a lot of technical information being presented. And we are going to bring in a third-party consultant who's going to evaluate all of the methods and the projections, and they're going to come back to us April 9th, and they're going to give us their opinions. April 8th, excuse me. And also, I also wanted to mention that the staff is putting together a companion document, and the companion document is going to give all of the technical kind of doings. So if you're a real junkie for the details, it's going to supply all of those details for you. And so hopefully we'll have that ready for our subcommittee meeting. So I'd like to start the discussion tonight, and I want to ask the very first question, and this is for the study group. What was the most surprising or interesting thing that you heard tonight? Hans. Yes.
Okay. The mic's on?
You can.
I'm sorry? All right, good. Hans Baumann. Something I'm not sure I'm really internalizing or understanding, and maybe I could get more detail on, is I heard about wage stagnation, but I also hear about predicted continued growth in our population and households. And I guess I had some trouble reconciling wage stagnation and decrease in jobs and employment with continued increased population. So.
Lisa, use a mic because we are taping this.
Just a point of clarification, we are continuing to grow jobs, without a doubt. Northern Virginia is expected to add 440,000 new jobs over the next 20 years. The jobs themselves are coming with lower wages. So I'm not sure if that helps clarify, but there are more people coming, and they're taking jobs in the region. The jobs, at least over the near term, look as though they will come with lower wages. So the people are still coming, they just have a little less money to spend on things like housing.
Nobody found anything interesting tonight? Gabriella. If you could say who you are, too.
Gabriela. Is it on? My name is Gabriela Uro. One thing that I found surprising was when APS was walking us through the, the ratios for predicting how many students, that single-family housing detached was significantly higher than, for example, multi-family units. And I think a lot of what I hear just in the community tends to be, oh, it's coming from the multi-family units. So that was surprising to me when I saw that.
And if anybody wants to react to anything that someone else says, then you can talk back and forth, too.
I think I actually would like to react to what was just said, because I was doing some math, sorry, John, during your presentation, and even though we have a low student generation factor, when you look at the multifamily units, you will see that in the previous presentation, that's all the building we're doing. So when I did some basic math, for a year, I have 436 students, 0.97 students, being generated out of the multifamily units, whereas I have 11.6 coming from the single-family detached, and 29.61 coming from the single-family attached. However, I would state that I think APS and the county don't define housing units the same, because they're not adding up between the two presentations.
We're actually going to talk a little bit about housing. I'd like to really touch on that. Housing is the one thing that's probably used in every presentation, but it's used in every presentation in a different way. So in Dr. Sturdivant's presentation, it was used at a kind of macro level, economic force level, and so Arlington is subject to demand. CPHD, or the county, uses housing as kind of a micro level. So it's more of a, what's the mix? What's actually being built? But they also use it in terms as an input to forecast and in their projections. And then schools uses it in terms of generation factors. They use it to decide how many kids are going to come out of each type of building. So everybody's using housing, but they're all using it in slightly different ways for slightly different purposes. So it's one thing that I wanted to make sure everyone is clear on, and I'd like to talk about housing more. Does anyone? Greg.
Hello? There we go. I do appreciate the fact that now we've made a differentiation between projections that the schools do, forecasts that the county do, because that question has come up again and again. Well, why are these different? Okay, we're measuring different things. I would like to see us take advantage of the fact that we have forecasts coming from the county so that we can actually meld what we do with student populations and create forecasts for student populations that mirror the forecast that the county makes for our resident population, because then we can have an idea of what we should anticipate 30 years from now for a student population.
So, go ahead, Jackie.
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Jackie Snelling. Another housing related question. And this in part comes from anecdotal stories about why people leave and why people stay. When you look at housing units and the way it appears to be used here and household size, it seems like there's a missing piece of information, which is housing unit size. So if you, because you hear a lot of one child and now I have to move because there aren't two children's spaces available. So one of the things that I feel like I need in order to make sense of this is to be able to look at housing types or housing unit types in terms of how many people they can accommodate in that housing unit, and how I look at that in terms of household size rather than an average. But that would be an important factor in trying to understand whether people are going to need to move as they have children.
So Jackie, I just wanted to, you've actually gotten ahead of me on the questions. You're answering a question that I haven't asked yet. Can we move forward the questions? So as a result of the committee's charge, a consultant is being hired to validate county and APS methodologies. Are there key demographic trends or influencing factors that we need to be monitoring that the consultant should keep in mind? What are we missing? I think that's identifying something that we're missing that maybe we could think about Jason.
Along with that, I'm Jason Rylander. I wonder if we are seeing any changes in the number of kids per family. Because one of the things that struck me was that we had 26,000 students when we had a population of just 135,000. Now we have 207,000 residents. Of course, most of that is probably growth in the apartments and that has gone up since then. But it's certainly interesting. The other thing that I don't think we have a full handle on is the difference in the capture rate is kind of striking.
We all know these neighborhoods. We live in them. I know what Arlington Forest looks like. If we look at where the population growths are and we look at that, I think we can probably draw a lot of this down in terms of the type of housing that's in there. So as I was going through a lot of these numbers, I was just thinking, boy, it would be great to just sort of see by zip code where we're seeing the birth rates, and then we can kind of drill into what that particular neighborhood or areas look like, and it's representative of what we're experiencing. So that's it.
Gabriella.
I just wanted to add on to what Jason said. I think some of the other indicators that might be important, and I don't know if they're already collected or not, but are maybe more qualitative in nature. And I know just the social, collecting that type of demographic information is a little bit tricky, but what came to mind for me was when looking at the accuracy of the grade progression ratio. If it's over a 3-year period, doesn't it depend which 3-year period you're looking at? So you can't presume that the behavior is the same when people were in a recession versus when they're coming out of the recession. And so in looking at the swings of how well it predicted the number of students going from year to year, I just wonder how much of the qualitative data is being factored into those calculations. The other thing too, I wanted to understand whether or not the grade by grade data were snapshot data or is it longitudinal data? And I know that now there's a lot more of the capability of having longitudinal data, at least for students, to really understand what is the relative movement of students coming in and out. Is it the same students we were looking at, or are there a different combination of students? And then the final thing I just want to ask is, are we capturing communities or subsets of the population that by definition they're moving in and out? So I was thinking we have a fair number of families that are in the Foreign Service, in the military, and then we also have the political appointees and all that means every time we have elections.
Lionel, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Thank you. In terms of the progression ratios, they're based on a 3-year average, and it would be the most recent, so it would be 4 years of history. So it would go back to 2010, and that 3-year average, like I showed in the chart, essentially we do that for every grade. It's a snapshot of the most recent history we have.
But you're not, so you have student ID numbers, right?
Yes.
So do you have a cohort of students that you're able to follow the actual student to see whether or not they leave or go? Or is it a snapshot of all the students that are here, and then the next one, you might have a similar number, but they might be different kids?
Right, it's the second thing you said, because quite honestly, it's a snapshot of who's in enrollment on September 30th. I mean, it would be an enormous amount of time to take each individual student and do that on, in such a tight window to prepare the. Oh, also John asked me to mention to you the 9th grade numbers, that cohort progression rate, it was 1.09. Whenever we have growth over 1.0, of course, it usually means someone's coming in from the outside. So it's growth from migration of some sort. Families moving to the area. Now, in terms of keeping track of individual residents, who moved in, who moved out, we don't really do that. We just kind of take a sum of everyone, that particular, how we define cohort, who's in enrollment on a given date.
Anne, introduce yourself.
Ann Steen. My quick question is regarding birth rate, and that is that with regard to how you collect that data, is it only Arlington hospitals? Because many families have their firstborn outside Arlington, and their doctor's health care may be outside Arlington, Alexandria, Sibley, places of that nature, and does that impact birth rate?
Yes, we get our information from the state of Virginia. So if your child is born in the state of Virginia and the mother has an address, an Arlington address, then it's considered an Arlington live birth. There are situations where we have families that have children maybe in Maryland, maybe they're affiliated with the military and there are hospitals there. Unfortunately, we don't have that information. That's not shared. But it's something that we're working on getting. However,
With healthcare too, I think with changes in healthcare, that's something to take a look at as well with providers and preferred providers and things of that nature, and what Arlington, Virginia hospitals have to offer versus others. So
I see.
to consider.
Yeah, and if I could just add one last thing. In terms of our kindergarten projection this year, I believe we're off 25 students. So the accuracy, even given the fact that we don't catch every state, was 99.8 or higher, which is pretty good. Okay.
Tanya,
Thank you.
please introduce yourself.
My name is Tanya Talento. I just wanted to make a comment on the 8th to 9th grade transition. I think it's important to note while we're looking at our consultant coming in that we have a lot of families who send their kids to private schools outside of Arlington through 8th grade. And then they come and return to high schools in Arlington because we are some of the best high schools in the country, and when you're applying to colleges, that's, reflects very, very well. And I also think it's important to consider the trends. We have millennials who maybe are moving out, but I'm a native of the DC area, which I know is not very common, but I know what a lot of us do is we literally jump from Arlington to Montgomery County to DC to PG. I mean, we are literally going all over the place until we settle down and find a family, and then we pick our neighborhood. And usually, those neighborhoods you're able to pick when you're more established and, probably 30s, maybe have a kid and, going into middle school, in a place where it's transition for them. So it'd just be interesting to see if there's any way to figure out how many of us come back to Arlington once we have our families established, if there's any kind of trend for that, because I think a lot of people, a lot of millennials may buy their first home in the suburbs, but don't be surprised if they come back sometime in middle school when they've gotten that job increase. Because remember, all of us here still work here. Just because we live out in Loudoun County or Montgomery County, we're still working in a very high income situation. And also the next thing to consider is due to the fact that our average medium income is sort of going down, that means less people are going to be using the private school option. So I don't know how that's going to affect the trends for enrollment later. It's just something to mention.
Thank you. Hans?
Yeah, and building on the kind of the conversation here around cohorts, something I've been involved in these student enrollment growth issues for longer than I want to remember, and I do think it's totally possible and reasonable to ask that because of these very questions, that when someone gets onto the September 30th enrollment, are they new to the system, previously in the system, from another school? And I think those aren't overly onerous data points, and they would really help us understand where is this coming from, and I know we've sometimes talked about this from a matter of, are there transfers within the school? Are they coming from private schools? Are they coming from homeschooling? How are they coming into the system? So I think that would be something that should be possible. Also, I just want to actually ask a question for maybe future research. The average household size has stabilized around 2, and yet we're seeing a lot new kids coming into the system out of single-family dwellings, if I'm putting all this data together, which makes me think the single-family dwelling number is going up, maybe? And so some further breakdown of these numbers, which gets me really to my last point, which is maybe we do need to have a single set of models that spans the county and the school system that we can rationalize and understand as one model, as opposed to, yeah, these are measuring different things for different purposes, rather have one model that is complementary or that somehow fits together more.
So I'm going to get to Lynn in just a second, but you actually beat me to the next question. Should APS be collecting more information that might help us better anticipate future student population growth? So what type of information should we be using? So think about that. I'll let Lynn go.
Lynn Pollock. One thing I see, especially on slide 19 from Lionel, is that there's a trend down from kindergarten to 12th grade. I understand we have this new increase in the kindergarten first and second grades, but if you look at the past information for 2010 especially, it also went down, and this might be related to what also has been said. Is this where we have students going out of our system and into private schools or to TJ? I know that's not many students, but this is another aspect I think we need to analyze.
John?
Yeah, I was interested, and it gets back to the question that Kathleen was talking about earlier, in the data on page 36, and the question is whether the growth that we're seeing is proportionate to the evolving number of housing units. I mean, that tells me that that apartment elevator has gone up from 9 to 10% during that period, but elevator apartment numbers have exploded. Single-family detached has gone up to 55%, while the number of single-family homes is basically the same. So I'm interested in where the growth is coming from, and I'm a little surprised by those numbers.
I think the big question is also, how can we predict that change over time?
Yeah, we know something about what the growth in various housing types is likely to be going forward, and if we can understand better, for every single-family home, the number of kids is going up and has been going up and is thought likely to continue to go up, while the numbers for apartments, multifamily apartments, may or may not be rising significantly on a per apartment basis. I don't know whether staff wants to comment on that, or.
I can comment and just say that we're getting the vast majority of students from single-family homes. The growth? Yes. Disproportionate growth? No, well, you can see the growth is here. It isn't changing that much. It's gone from 51 to 55 since 2004, 2005. And even the condo elevator's gone down a bit. Actually, we should be looking at finer numbers than that to see what they really are. And then the other area where I would say that without doubt we are receiving more students is from affordable housing units, particularly the certified affordable, because they are filled, they rent a unit of a certain size to a family of a certain size because they want to serve that family. So we are pretty clear how many we're going to be getting from those units.
Greg?
One point I'd also like to introduce, and this comes from a conversation I had probably about 4 years ago, back when Allison Denton was the demographer for Arlington schools. And I was pushing very hard to understand what's the peak, what's the maximum number of students that we could expect within the school system. And what she had related to me at that point is she looked at the generation factors for Fairfax County. So if Arlington homes were producing as many children for the school system as the Fairfax homes were producing for the Fairfax school system, what that would mean is our student population would actually be around 40,000 students, not 30,000. So I think there is a huge risk that as people continue to move to Arlington for schools, for Arlington, that we're going to continue to see more and more students coming out of our single-family homes, and that generation factor, how many students are coming from the houses, isn't going to be that 0.42 factor that Lionel showed us here on the screen. It could be a 0.56 or a 5.9. And that would have huge implications for the number of schools that we need to have for our students.
So do you think, does everyone here think that that might be a potential key challenge that we could explore further in subcommittee? Yes, okay. Kathleen?
I just wanted to reiterate that I think that definitions are important. And I did want to mention that the definitions of the different housing types are different between the county and schools. Also, they're 4,000 off between county and schools. So, and that speaks to the one, single source between the two. But I also, because I keep hearing this question, and I just want to make sure, maybe we need some additional drill down of some of the data, because I'm hearing affordable housing, I'm hearing multifamily. Those are really different things. Affordable housing is a subset of the multifamily, and it's a small subset. So I think we should know what those numbers are in general. We should talk in terms of gross numbers, not necessarily always in terms of percentages.
Absolutely. And I wanted to get to that point. We are hiring the consultant, and their task is to address concerns about different sets of numbers between the county and APS. So we're hiring experts to take a look at it, and then we'll get into that probably in the subcommittee, and then later when they come and present to us. Gabriella. Related.
Just very quickly, one additional piece of information that would be important is looking at pre-K, because that number is a suppressed number based on the availability of seats. So I think, that's why you see that big jump from pre-K to kindergarten. I think it'd be important for us to really have a better sense of what is the demand at pre-K, because also it might be an opportunity for, if what you want to do is try to get folks not to leave Arlington. One of the key things that folks, when they're going back to work, they want to have a place where they can, have a safe place and a good place for their kids. And if they go to another place to provide or to get pre-K for their kid, they might be then leaving eventually Arlington.
Jackie.
Yeah, 2 points. One, following up on Gabriella. One of the things that it's not immediately obvious in those growth trends over years is that in the 80s, there were not full-day kindergartens, and there were not preschools. So when you're looking at those numbers over time, you're comparing a time period when there were not preschools or kindergarten to a time period when they've grown, and you can't see that. So one of the things that you would want to look at that might actually explain some of the retention is exactly what you're saying. The more preschool and full-day kindergartens you have, the more people then stay going on. The other thing, other point was, in the past, and I don't know if there's something like this now, there used to be a school census survey that was conducted, and while it wasn't completely everyone in the county, it did provide some data that answered some of the more specific school questions. So I think one of the things we'd want to look at is what that survey used to provide, whether there's something valuable in that, and whether some version of that should be reinstituted.
Lisa, do you want to?
Yeah, we used to do the school survey for VDOE. It was a requirement by the state, and they actually send the surveys into the administration. They cut that, and they're using the Weldon Cooper data instead. So we miss capturing that information right now, and we don't have another process in place for us to do it locally at the moment. We don't use the Cooper data for our stuff because we have actual student enrollments. That's what the county ends up using, though.
Jason?
Jason Rylander again. I guess another thing I would just suggest is that we pay close attention to the slides on the current projections and anticipated enrollment, and try to get a handle on just how many seats we actually think we're going to need, recognizing that the school system is looking at ways to use the buildings more efficiently and generate seats within existing buildings. Nonetheless, these charts suggest that we're going to be needing a number of new schools at each level elementary, middle, and high. And that's certainly something that we're going to need to keep in mind as a committee as we look toward the future, not just the 5-year projections that Lionel stressed, but that 10-year projection, which looks pretty scary if that's the way we're headed.
And I just want to make it clear that we're looking at the demographics, but schools has presented tonight, but we're not only looking at demographics for schools. We're also considering how demographics affects everything else. So as we're going to progress into the facilities needs, and so we're going to be looking at how demographics are affecting parks and rec fields and bus storage and so it's not just schools. I know we're talking about that a lot tonight, but I want to make sure everyone's aware that we're going to be talking about Arlington as a whole. Andrew.
I just wanted to address one of the comments that you made, Kathleen. The housing unit numbers are different because they're different time periods. So this is a 2013 to 2014 school year period. So that was a GIS analysis done in 13. The numbers we had at the very beginning were estimates that we developed internally that were meant to represent January 1, 2015. So we've had growth during that period, and this is something we're actively working on now, is reconciling these housing unit types by address. So we're working with the mapping center to make sure that this is all the same thing moving forward, and that we have a robust data set, as you mentioned.
Do we have any final questions or comments from the study group? So I think we're going to try and allow a little bit of time for the larger group to ask questions. Sandra.
Related to, oh, I'm sorry. I just have a question that's related to, I think it's John's presentation, when you were looking at the schools that had renovations and were new. Was that John? Yeah. Where is he? Okay. I noticed Langston School wasn't on there. Is that because it's a joint use facility, or it wasn't included in the data anywhere?
It's an omission, should have been in there.
Oh, okay. And Reed, yeah. Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't
so
think about
we'll
that.
change that. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other final comments or closing comments from the study group? Okay, we're going to move on to the larger group. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Okay, Sarah McKinley from Columbia Heights Civic Association. I was very interested in the slides that dealt with the single-family homes where there's tear-downs and rebuilds, and also the additions. And I think that one thing that is happening is it used to be, I mean, we have a housing stock here that's old. A lot of the buildings were built in the 40s and 50s. And, you know, as families got bigger, they moved out to the suburbs. And I know that a lot of people I know that they made a decision that instead of moving out to the suburbs, they would build additions in their home so that, you know, as their families grew, they stayed here. And, you know, I know several families that did this. So if you have a 1,000-foot addition to your home, it's probably because you have more kids. Either that or you've got, you know, your mother moving in with you because she's elderly or something. I mean, there can be many reasons for that, but a very cogent reason is that you've got more kids. You have to make a decision. Do you buy a bigger house out in Fairfax, or do you stay here? You put the money into raising the roof, putting on a new addition, new bathrooms, whatever. So I'm looking, you know, is it possible that you could do a projection of, since most of the kids are coming from the single-family homes, I'm wondering how predictive it would be to look at the 1,000-foot additions that are being projected in the county, and to be able to say, you know, to be able to predict how many more kids would be coming in future years because of the additions or the tear-downs.
Andrew?
That's something we're wondering as well. So unfortunately, there's some limitations to that data. The permitting system was set up to collect fees. It wasn't set up to project students. You know, we've assembled it, and that's something that we're looking into with a very similar question. Can it be predictive given the constraints that we have and that we know about?
Sir.
Hi, I'm with the Nottingham PTA. Could you go to slide 14 of the demographics by chance? Anyway, I think I can tie together some of the questions you're asking. So you'll see that out of the single family homes, there's been a significant increase in the number of people per household. So then when you jump ahead to the APS presentation, actually first let's go to slide 20 in that presentation. And you will see that the number of children under 5, you can go to page 20, it shows the Arlington demographics growth of under 5 cohort. Oh, you're not on the screens. Oh, I see. Anyway, so there is a steep upslope, and one of the big challenges in the APS forecast is that for the next 6 years, the projected kindergarten size is flat, but we show that the under 5 population is increasing steeply. Going from 11,981 in 2010 to 13,540. So we should be seeing that growth in the APS forecast in the kindergarten cohort. So then when you go to the APS forecast, or the demographic data that talks about how many kids are coming from single-family homes, you see that single-family homes in the housing data are a shrinking percentage of the total housing stock, but still holding steady in the total production of students. So what's happening in my neighborhood is, as a huge stock of homes built in the 50s are being knocked down, they're being replaced by new large homes, all bought by younger families with lots of school kids. And so an ever-shrinking percentage is still supplying the same percentage of the total population in the schools, and then the growth in multifamily is essentially growth on top of that. So I actually think the APS forecast is very low, and we really need to dig into growth, not looking backwards at what did happen. And then the other thing is we need to look at areas where the housing stock is more expensive. Because as housing prices increase faster than wealth, in New York, there's lots of families in multi-tenant buildings. And we will be seeing that exact same trend here, and we cannot assume that looking backwards is going to tell us the future. Thank you.
Right. Carrie?
Thank you. Well, the mic is right here. Carrie Johnson, Free Radical.
Carrie,
you laugh, that's my favorite title these days. To add to the complexity of the data, it would be helpful to have, there is a cap on the number of single-family lots in Arlington. It would be nice to know what that is. How many is the maximum single-family homes we can build without changing the zoning? Somebody knows that, and that would help end this sort of endlessly spiraling up projection. The second thing, in addition to the building permits, would be simply house sales of houses that sell without at the same time necessarily either being torn down or rebuilt. I know that can be added complexities because most teardowns involve 2 sales. The owner sells it to the builder, who then sells it after they build something bigger. But all of that will help indicate where, not only how much activity we can anticipate, but where it is in the county. Because if you look at the projections, the generation factors, in more fine-grained charts, which I know APS has because I've gone blind trying to understand them, you can tell which neighborhoods have the largest student generation now, and I suspect those will equate very closely with the amount of real estate transactions and building in those neighborhoods. And as that moves around the county, those projections are going to move around as well. So I think you need more sophisticated analysis of what's happening in the neighborhoods. And I just wanted to second Jackie's suggestion about knowing not just how many units in multifamily buildings, but how many bedrooms, because that's a very key element in what those units are going to be able to accommodate in the future. Thanks.
Sarah? Please introduce yourself.
I'm Sarah Shortle from your neighborhood association, Ginger, Waverly Hills. I thought it was very interesting, the comment about what happens on lots right now in terms of either tear downs and building larger houses or adding on 1,000-foot additions to that. But I think there's also one other thing that's happening that I think could affect school enrollment, that is the number of larger lots that there are tear downs and the lot is subdivided and more than one new home is put up with a potential of children in each one of those homes, which could increase the overall enrollment. And I also would like to see if there could be some more, and I know Ms. Sturtevant's data was looking, her demographics and data were looking primarily at housing trends. But I'd like to see how her housing trend information could impact or alter the projections that are being made on enrollment in the future. And I think I agree with whoever said you can't just look backwards. I think looking forward at those trends and bringing those trends over to the what's happening in the projections of the school, I think is an important concept.
Okay, it's almost 10 o'clock. We have
Ginger?
one more. In the back.
Hi, I'm Joshua Waldman. I'm representing the Barcroft Elementary PTA. And the comment that I'd like to make is when we're addressing student issues, there is a tendency to talk about all students and their needs from the county's perspective as if they're all interchangeable. And I'd like the committee to think about the fact that that's not necessarily true within this county. And in particular, when you look at income rates in the various portions of the county and how that impacts student performance. I know in Fairfax County recently did a study in 2013 looking at the impact of poverty rates, poverty defined as free or reduced lunches, and what that does to student performance, and not just for students who are in a home where there's poverty, but for all the students who attend that school, whether they're from impoverished backgrounds or not. And what the study concluded in Fairfax and Montgomery County did a similar study that reached the same results in 2010, is that there is a marked decrease in student performance for all students that is measurable once you get below 20% of free lunch. There are a majority of schools in the southern portion of the county that are well over 20%, are well over 50%. My own elementary school is projected to be 70% next year. So when you think about what are the needs that the county has to address the performance of the students and not merely what seats you're going to put them in, you should think about what is going on in the county. And much of the, in fact, all of the data here on the schools is aggregated at the entire county level. None of it is divided into different neighborhoods. What is driving enrollment growth in one part of the county may be different in another part of the county, particularly when you look at the Metro Corridor, the Orange Line and Yellow Line, the Columbia Pike Corridor. It's vastly different from what's happening in Nottingham and Tuckahoe areas. And you should think about that. Please do not treat all parts of the county as if their needs and what resources are needed for them are the same.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody. I think this is a good beginning to the discussion. It's obviously just the beginning. Just a couple of comments on where we go from here. As I think many know, subcommittees have been appointed to dig deeper into these issues, and Ginger Brown will be chairing the demographic subcommittee. There's a subcommittee dealing with economics and revenue issues, which we talked about last month. That subcommittee will be meeting on the night of the 16th. Look at the website. Future meetings are going to be posted on the website. Everybody is invited, both members of the study group, whether or not you're on the committee, you're welcome to come to the meeting, interested members of the public as well, and the full group resumes its activities and back on this issue on the 25th of March. Again, thank you very much. Just one note, the gate closes at 10:30. So I know you want to chat with your friends, but don't linger too long.